Kang Daehyun moved through the world as a creature of exquisite control. His empire, a labyrinth of legitimate corporations built upon the bedrock of a darker, more illicit legacy, ran on the principles he embodied: precision, silence, and overwhelming force held in reserve. Every suit he wore was a piece of bespoke armor. Every word he spoke a calculated move on a global chessboard. Emotion was a liability, a vulnerability he had long since excised from his public and private life. Yet, for one person, he allowed a single, carefully cultivated exception: Tiffany, his American fiancée. She was, to him, the final piece of his constructed perfection, a woman whose beauty was as flawless as a cut diamond, whose social grace was a strategic asset, and whose laughter, he believed, was the one sound that could soften the hard edges of his world. Today was Valentine's Day, and for the first time in years, Daehyun was indulging in a gesture of pure, uncalculated romance. He had cut short a critical negotiation in Tokyo, a move that had left his subordinate speechless, all to be home a day early. In his hand, he held a bouquet of 100 blood-red roses, so perfect they seemed unreal, their thorns meticulously removed by the city's finest florist. In his pocket, a small, heavy velvet box held the promise of a lifetime. He envisioned her surprise, the gasp of delight, the way her perfectly manicured hands would touch his face. He imagined the perfection of the moment, another flawless tile laid in the mosaic of the life he was building. He walked through the silent, marble-floored halls of his estate, a ghost of a smile on his lips, moving towards the sprawling gardens at the rear of the house, where he knew she liked to take her afternoon tea. But as he neared the glass doors, a sound, ugly and sharp, cut through the serene air. It was Tiffany's voice, but stripped of its melodic charm, twisted into a spike of pure, venomous contempt. He stopped, concealed by the heavy damask curtains. The scene before him was a tableau of such grotesque cruelty that it seemed to warp the very air. There, in the center of the meticulously manicured lawn, stood Tiffany. She was a vision in a scarlet dress, the color of the roses in his hand, a stark slash of crimson against the green. Before her, on her knees, was Alara, the young woman who tended to the household with a quiet, almost invisible grace. Alara was just 22, a gentle soul whose presence was a calming balm in the otherwise sterile opulence of the mansion. She wore her simple light blue uniform, the white apron a mark of her service. But now that uniform was being desecrated. Tiffany held a large terracotta bucket, her face contorted into a sneer of utter disgust. "Do you understand me, you filthy thing?" she spat, the words slicing through the peaceful garden ambience. "You look at him again, and I will do more than this. You are dirt. You exist to clean up my dirt," and with a final, vicious grunt of effort, she upended the bucket. A thick, sludgy torrent of mud and grimy water cascaded over Alara's head, drenching her completely. It plastered her hair to her scalp, ran in brown rivulets down her beautiful, stunned face, and soaked the light blue fabric of her dress, turning it into a sodden, humiliating shroud. Alara didn't cry out. She simply knelt there, her shoulders curled inward, a silent testament to a spirit enduring the unendurable. Daehyun felt nothing, and that nothing was the most terrifying sensation he had ever known. It was not the hot flash of anger he would have expected. It was a plunge into an abyss of absolute cold. The warmth he had felt, the rare bloom of sentimentality, instantly flash-froze and shattered into a billion microscopic shards of ice. The roses in his hand suddenly felt like a bundle of withered weeds. His fingers went numb, and the bouquet slipped, falling to the marble floor with a soft, funereal thud. The perfect red petals scattered across the pristine white stone, looking like droplets of blood from a mortal wound. The velvet box in his pocket now felt like a lead weight, a tombstone for a future that had just died. He had seen violence, brutality, the worst of human nature in his business. But that was the chaos of his world. This was different. This was intimate, personal cruelty, a deliberate act of degradation disguised in beauty and aimed at the most gentle soul in his home. The mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped away, and what lay beneath was a monster far uglier than any rival gangster he had ever faced. He did not storm out. He did not yell. A man like Kang Dae-hyun did not react. He acted. The first casualty of this war would be Tiffany's ignorance of his presence. He melted back into the shadows of the hallway, his movements as silent as a predator's. His mind, a cold engine of logic and strategy, was already working, processing the new, horrifying data. The woman he was about to bind his life and empire to was a fraud. A beautiful, hollow shell filled with poison. The entire foundation of his personal life was a lie, and lies in his world were cancers that had to be cut out with surgical precision. He retreated to his private study, the one room Tiffany was not permitted to enter, and locked the door. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked a different, more secluded part of the estate, his private greenhouse. Inside, hundreds of rare and priceless orchids bloomed in a perfectly controlled environment. They were his one true passion, a world of fragile, complex beauty that demanded patience, observation, and a deep understanding of their nature. He now understood. He had applied none of that rigor to the woman he was to marry. He had been seduced by the perfect bloom and had never once checked for the rot at the root. He picked up his phone and made a single call to Mr. Park, his head of security, a man whose loyalty was as solid and unyielding as granite. "I need a comprehensive surveillance package installed throughout the house and grounds." Dae-hyun's voice was devoid of any inflection, a flat, metallic sound. "Audio and visual. Highest resolution. I want it done by morning. No one is to be aware of it, especially Tiffany." There was no question from the other end. "It will be done, sir." That was his first move. Not a confrontation, but observation. He would not give her the satisfaction of a dramatic fight. He would give her nothing but the same silken, charming surface she presented to the world. He would watch. He would listen. He would gather the evidence of her true nature until he had an arsenal so complete, so damning, that her destruction would be absolute. He looked down at his own hands, his knuckles white where he gripped the phone. He had built an empire on his ability to see the truth behind men's eyes. How had he been so blind? The image of Alara, kneeling in the mud, her dignity assaulted but somehow not broken, burned behind his eyelids. He felt a strange, unfamiliar stirring, not pity, but a cold, burning resolve for justice. He had protected his assets, his territory, his power. Now, he would become the protector of a quiet maid who had shown more strength in her silent endurance than Tiffany had in her performative power. The game had changed. The prize was no longer a perfect marriage, but a perfect reckoning. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Dae-hyun was the epitome of the devoted fiancé. He apologized for his late arrival, blaming a sudden complication in Tokyo. He presented Tiffany with an obscenely expensive diamond necklace instead of the ring, claiming the Valentine's surprise had been a custom piece that wasn't ready. He played his part with chilling perfection, his smile never faltering, his touch gentle, his words affirming. Tiffany, preening in her victory and relieved at his apparent obliviousness, suspected nothing. She believed her cruel little display in the garden had gone unnoticed, a private assertion of her dominance that had successfully put the maid in her place. But beneath this placid surface, Dae-hyun was a hunter, and his home had become his hunting ground. Every evening, in the sanctuary of his study, he reviewed the day's footage. The high-definition cameras Mr. Park's team had installed were invisible, their lenses hidden in smoke detectors, air vents, and clock faces. The audio was crystal clear. He watched Tiffany move through her day, a Jekyll and Hyde of the highest order. In public, on calls with her socialite friends or the wedding planner, she was all sweetness and light, her voice a melodious river of charm. But the moment she was alone with the staff, the mask dissolved. He saw her trip a young houseboy, then laugh as he scrambled to pick up the scattered mail. He heard her mock the head cook's accent in a scathing whisper to a friend on the phone. And he watched her campaign of quiet terror against Alara. It was never as overt as the mud incident again. It was 1,000 tiny, venomous cuts. a misplaced family heirloom that Alara would be forced to search for in a panic for hours. A spilled glass of red wine on a freshly laundered white tablecloth, always when Alara was nearby to be blamed. A constant stream of condescending remarks, delivered with a saccharine smile. Try to keep up, dear. Or, is that really the best you can do? Through it all, Alara remained a portrait of stoic grace. She never retaliated, never complained, never broke. She simply did her work, her movements economical and precise, her face a calm, unreadable mask that Dae-hyun was beginning to realize was a shield of incredible strength. She cleaned up the messes, endured the insults, and met every act of cruelty with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate Tiffany even more. Dae-hyun felt a slow, unfamiliar admiration bloom in the frozen wasteland of his chest. It was during this period of observation that he began his own silent communication with Alara. His gestures were as subtle as hers. He noticed her worn-out, sensible work shoes left by the staff entrance one evening. The next morning, a new, identical pair, made of the finest, softest leather, sat in their place. He saw her spending her short breaks in a neglected corner of the garden, trying to coax a few sad-looking wildflowers back to life. The following day, a small, unmarked crate appeared in that corner, containing high-grade fertilizer, gardening gloves, and a collection of rare, hardy seeds for flowering perennials. He learned from the head cook that Alara often skipped meals, too busy to sit down. From then on, a small, insulated lunchbox containing a nutritious, carefully prepared meal would be left on the counter for her, with a simple note that read, "Staff meal." He did these things through Mr. Park, leaving no direct trace back to himself. He wanted nothing from her, no gratitude, no acknowledgement. These were not acts of charity, they were acts of counterbalance. For every piece of cruelty Tiffany inflicted, he would introduce a small, anonymous piece of kindness into Alara's world. He was balancing the scales, not yet tipping them. The most profound connection, however, occurred without any physical object. Dae-hyun began to notice a pattern. Every evening, just after dusk, Alara would finish her duties and walk to the edge of the formal gardens near the imposing glass structure of his private greenhouse. She would never try to enter, never even touch the glass. She would simply stand there for a few minutes, her posture relaxed, and look at the silhouettes of the exotic orchids within, their strange, beautiful shapes backlit by the soft interior lighting. She was the only person on the estate, other than himself, who seemed to appreciate them not for their monetary value, but for their living beauty. One rainy evening, he was in his study, watching the rain streak down the glass, when he saw her small figure walking towards the greenhouse, huddled under a simple black umbrella. He watched her stand there, a solitary shape in the gray, deepening twilight. On impulse, he did something he had never done before. He left his study, walked down the long, silent corridor to the side entrance, and stepped out into the rain. He walked towards her, his own expensive suit getting damp. She heard his footsteps on the gravel path and turned, her eyes widening in surprise, but not fear. He stopped a few feet from her. The sound of the rain was a soft curtain around them.
He didn't speak.
He simply looked at her, then at the greenhouse, then back at her. Her gaze was direct, her expression calm. In her eyes, he saw not a servant, but an equal. A deep, quiet intelligence resided there, a weary strength that he found himself inexplicably drawn to. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the storm of calculation raging inside him. "You like the orchids," it was a statement, not a question. Alara inclined her head slightly, a gesture of formal respect that was somehow devoid of subservience. "They are beautiful, sir." They seemed to demand a certain kind of quiet to be truly seen. Her voice was soft but clear, like the chime of a small bell. Her choice of words, "demand a certain kind of quiet," struck him. It was an insight that Tiffany, with all her talk of aesthetics and luxury, could never have conceived. Tiffany saw the greenhouse as a possession, a backdrop for a magazine shoot. Alara saw its soul. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, heavy brass key. It was the only other key to the greenhouse. He held it out to her. The Phalaenopsis gilleriana on the west bench is struggling. Its leaves are yellowing. I believe the humidity is too high in that corner. Alara looked at the key, then at his face, her expression searching. She was not accustomed to kindness, and she was rightly suspicious of it, especially from a man like him, the fiancé of her tormentor. He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes and understood it completely. I am not always home to adjust the systems, he added, providing a logical, impersonal reason for his action. Your eye is observant. You would notice a change before the automated systems would. This reframing, from a gift to a responsibility, seemed to settle something within her. She slowly reached out and took the key, her cool fingers brushing against his for a fleeting second. The contact was electric, a jolt of simple human connection that felt more real than any kiss he had ever shared with Tiffany. I will keep an eye on it, sir, she said, her voice steady. Thank you. She then turned and walked away, her umbrella a small black dome disappearing into the rain-soaked darkness. Dae-hyun stood there for a long time, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, not caring that his $1,000 suit was being ruined. He had just handed over the key to his sanctuary, his most private world, to a woman he barely knew, based on nothing more than instinct. He felt a crack appear in the icy wall around his heart, a fissure through which a strange, warm light was beginning to seep. This was more dangerous than any business deal, more volatile than any rival. And he found, to his profound surprise, that he was not afraid. He was, for the first time in a very long time, truly, deeply intrigued. Tiffany was not an intellectual, but she possessed a feral cunning, an animal instinct for threats to her territory. She began to sense a shift in the mansion's atmosphere, a change in the currents of power she could not name but felt deep in her bones. Dae-hyun was more attentive than ever, his gifts more extravagant, his public pronouncements of their impending marriage more frequent. Yet, when he looked at her, his eyes were like polished stones, their depths unreadable and cold. The easy, possessive warmth that had once been there was gone, replaced by a flawless, chilling courtesy. Her paranoia, always simmering just below the surface of her narcissism, began to boil. She started watching, her eyes darting, searching for the source of the disturbance. And her gaze, inevitably, fell upon Alara. She saw the new shoes. She noticed the small, flourishing patch of garden that was now bursting with vibrant, exotic blooms. She saw the insulated lunchbox that appeared each day, a silent rebuke to her own petty acts of starvation. And one afternoon, while looking for Dae-hyun to show off a new couture gown, she saw him through the glass walls of the greenhouse. He was inside, speaking to Alara. There was nothing untoward in their posture. They stood feet apart, discussing a wilting orchid. But the sight of Alara inside that holy of holies, the one place Tiffany herself was only allowed to enter with his express permission, sent a jolt of pure, venomous rage through her. She saw the quiet respect in Dae-hyun's posture, the focused attention he gave to the maid's words. It was an intimacy of the mind, a shared purpose that she, with all her beauty and charm, had never been able to achieve with him. She had mistaken his detachment for respect. Now she saw it as a void she had never been able to fill. In her twisted, self-centered worldview, the only possible explanation was the most sordid one. He was sleeping with the help. The thought was so repulsive, so insulting to her status, that it solidified into a malevolent certainty. Alara was not just an annoyance anymore. She was a rival, an infestation that had to be exterminated. And Tiffany, who had always gotten everything she wanted, knew exactly how to destroy a person with no power, no name, and no one to protect them. She would not use mud this time. She would use something far filthier, a public lie. Her plan began to form, a sophisticated piece of social warfare designed not just to get Alara fired, but to ruin her life, to brand her as a criminal so thoroughly that she would never find decent work again. The annual Dae-hyun Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. It was an event where immense wealth and power converged, a place where reputations were made and, if one was not careful, spectacularly broken. It was the perfect stage for Tiffany's masterpiece of cruelty. In the week leading up to the gala, she was a whirlwind of saccharine sweetness, showering Alara with feigned kindness. "Alara, could you help me with my dress fitting? Your eye for detail is just so much better than anyone else's. Alara, would you be a dear and pack my jewelry case for the gala? I trust you implicitly." Each request was a carefully laid stone on the path to ruin. The centerpiece of her plan was a magnificent sapphire and diamond necklace, a recent gift from Daehyun, valued at over $500,000. On the night of the gala, held in the grand ballroom of a five-star hotel that Daehyun owned, Tiffany made her move. She instructed Alara to bring her jewelry case to her private dressing suite. While Alara was distracted by another feigned request, Tiffany, with the sleight of hand of a practiced con artist, slipped a small, priceless diamond earring, a piece she had reported missing from the set weeks ago, into the lining of Alara's simple cloth handbag. Later, at the height of the evening, as Daehyun was on stage giving a speech, Tiffany let out a theatrical gasp. She clutched at her neck, her eyes wide with manufactured panic. "My necklace. It's gone." A ripple of alarm went through the opulent ballroom. The music stopped. Security discreetly sealed the exits. Tiffany, playing the victim to perfection, began to weep. "It was here just a moment ago. I feel so faint then." Turning to a stern-faced security chief she had already primed, she delivered the killing blow, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The new maid, Alara. She was the only one who helped me with my jewelry tonight." I didn't want to believe it, but she was admiring it so intently. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. All eyes turned to where Alara stood near the service entrance, her face pale with shock. The security chief, a man whose loyalty Tiffany had purchased, approached Alara. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to empty your handbag. It was a public crucifixion." Every camera phone, every pair of judgmental eyes was on the young woman in the simple black staff uniform as she was forced to prove her innocence. But Tiffany had planned for that too. As the security chief found the planted earring, a second part of the trap was sprung. The massive LED screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the foundation's logo, flickered to life. They displayed a grainy, black and white security video, seemingly from the hotel's own system. It showed a figure, blurred but unmistakably a woman in a staff uniform, lingering near the dressing suite. The timestamp was from earlier that evening. "We have footage of the suspect near the scene," the security chief announced, his voice booming through the silent room. Tiffany's mask of distress was a work of art. She had created the perfect narrative. A poor, jealous maid, tempted by unimaginable wealth, had stolen from her kind and trusting benefactress. Alara stood frozen, her world collapsing in a storm of lights and whispers. She was trapped, framed by a web of lies so complete, so technologically sophisticated, that the truth seemed to have no way out. Daehyun stood on the stage, the microphone still live in his hand, and watched the entire sordid drama unfold. He felt a profound, arctic calm settle over him. He had known Tiffany was planning something. The surveillance had shown her meeting with the hotel's security chief, the discreet exchange of an envelope. He had seen her planting the earring in Alara's bag just hours before. He had been waiting for her to make her move on the biggest stage possible, and she had not disappointed. She had overplayed her hand so spectacularly, so publicly, that she had given him the perfect gift, the instrument of her own annihilation. He let the scene play out for a few moments longer, allowing the poison of her accusation to fully permeate the room. He watched the faces in the crowd, the shock, the pity, the smug judgment. He saw the single tear that finally escaped Alara's eye, a silent admission of defeat against an overwhelming force. And then he acted. He raised the microphone to his lips. His voice, amplified by the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system, cut through the murmurs with the sharp, clean authority of a judge's gavel. "Stop!" The single word brought an immediate, absolute silence. All heads swiveled towards him. The security chief froze, his hand still holding the earring aloft. Tiffany looked up at him, her tear-streaked face a perfect mask of tragic relief, expecting him to deliver the final condemnation. He looked directly at her, his eyes as cold and hard as obsidian. "That video is interesting," he said, his tone conversational, almost academic. "A very convincing piece of fiction." He gave a subtle nod to Mr. Park, who was standing unobtrusively at the AV control panel at the back of the room. "But in the interest of truth, I believe we should see the original, unedited footage. Don't you?" Before Tiffany could process what was happening, the grainy video on the giant screens vanished. It was replaced by a new video, this one in stunning 4K resolution, with crystal-clear audio. The image was of Tiffany's dressing suite. The camera angle was different, from a smoke detector directly overhead. The audio began to play. It was Tiffany's voice, speaking to the security chief. "The bonus will be in your account tomorrow. Just make sure you find the earring in her bag and play the video I gave you. No one will question it." The entire ballroom, hundreds of the city's elite, heard her conspiring to frame an innocent woman. A collective gasp, sharp and unified, swept the room. The screen then split. One side showed Tiffany planting the earring. The other side showed the raw footage from the hallway camera, revealing that the blurry figure was actually another staff member, a man, who was simply delivering fresh towels. The lie was not just exposed, it was dissected and laid bare for all to see. But Dae-hyun was not finished. This was not merely about exonerating Alara, it was about the complete and utter demolition of a false idol. "You see," he continued, his voice a low, lethal murmur that carried to every corner of the silent hall, "I have a passion for the truth. I find it." Clarifying, he nodded to Mr. Park again. A new clip began to play. The scene was instantly recognizable, the sun-drenched garden of his estate. The audience watched in stunned horror as the beautiful, sophisticated Tiffany they knew transformed into a shrieking harpy, her face twisted with rage as she dumped a bucket of mud over Alara's head. The raw audio filled the room, her venomous words, "Filthy thing. You are dirt," echoing in the gilded silence. Clip after clip followed, a meticulous montage of her cruelty. Tiffany berating the elderly cook. Tiffany tripping the houseboy. Tiffany on the phone, mocking her best friends, the very women who now sat in the audience staring at the screen, their faces masks of shock and betrayal. It was a systematic, cold-blooded execution of a reputation. The mask was not just removed, it was vaporized. Tiffany stood frozen beside the stage, her face ashen. The artful tears had dried, replaced by the stark, ugly pallor of pure terror. The whispers in the room grew into a low, angry roar of condemnation. She was no longer a victim. She was a pariah, exposed in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. Dae-hyun finally lowered the microphone, his work done. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at her, his face devoid of all emotion. He had felt rage, he had felt betrayal, but now, all that remained was a profound emptiness, a disgust for the creature he had almost bound himself to. He spoke to her one last time, his voice not for the audience, but for her alone. "It's over." He then turned his back on her, a final, dismissive gesture of erasure. He addressed the security chief. "You are fired, and you will be prosecuted for filing a false report and conspiracy." He gestured to two of his own men, who moved swiftly to escort the disgraced chief out of the room. As if on cue, two uniformed police officers, prearranged by the ever-efficient Mr. Park, entered the ballroom. They approached Tiffany, their expressions grim. The public spectacle was complete. Justice, in Dae-hyun's world, was not a blind concept of the courts. It was a targeted, overwhelming, and unforgettable event. He had turned her own stage into her guillotine. In the chaotic aftermath, as Tiffany was led away to face a future of legal battles and social ruin, Dae-hyun's only concern was for Alara. He scanned the room and found her where she had been left, standing alone near the service corridor, a solitary island in a sea of shocked and murmuring guests. The members of the staff had instinctively formed a protective circle around her, their faces a mixture of relief and fierce loyalty. He descended the stage and walked towards her, the crowd parting before him as if he were royalty. He stopped in front of her. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were clear, and her composure, though fragile, was intact. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not a maid, not a victim, but the woman herself, in all her quiet, formidable strength. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She simply nodded, unable to find the words. He understood. He turned to his head of household. "Ensure Miss Alara is escorted home safely. Give her the rest of the week off, with full pay. In fact, give the entire staff a bonus and 2 days off. They have endured far too much." He then looked back at Alara. He owed her more than a rescue. He owed her an apology. "I am sorry," he said, the words feeling foreign but necessary on his tongue. "I am sorry for bringing that into your life. For my blindness. It was a failing I will not repeat." He could have offered her money, a blank check to start a new life anywhere she wanted, a conventional solution for a man of his means. But he knew, instinctively, that this was not what she needed or wanted. Her dignity was not for sale. She looked at him, and a flicker of a genuine, small smile touched her lips. "The Phalaenopsis scilariana," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you adjust the humidity?" The question was so unexpected, so completely disconnected from the high drama of the evening, that it took him a moment to respond. She was bringing him back to their shared quiet place, to the one pure thing that had existed between them. She was reminding him of who he was when he wasn't a corporate titan or a vengeful force of nature, the man who cared for his orchids. "I did," he replied, a genuine smile reaching his own eyes for the first time that night. The leaves are green again, and understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of a bond forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. He knew then that his world had been irrevocably altered, not by the explosion of the gala, but by the quiet strength of the woman standing before him. The reckoning was over. The healing was about to begin. A few months passed, months of profound and quiet change. The name Tiffany vanished from the society pages, replaced by stories of lawsuits and scandal before she disappeared from public life entirely, a ghost of a memory. For Daehyun, her absence was like the removal of a tumor. The space it left behind was not empty, but clean, ready for healthy growth. Guided by a new, internal compass, he began a methodical restructuring of his empire. The lines that were once morally gray began to sharpen into clearer blacks and whites. Certain contracts were terminated, certain partners cut loose. His subordinates, accustomed to his ruthless pragmatism, were baffled by his newfound emphasis on ethical conduct, not understanding that his definition of strength was being reshaped by a quiet, unassuming influence. Alara had not accepted his offer of a new life elsewhere. Instead, after her week off, she had returned to the mansion. But things were different. She no longer wore the uniform. At her request, she was given a new role, the sole curator of the gardens and the greenhouse, a position created just for her. She was no longer a servant, but a respected specialist, an artist whose medium was the earth. Their relationship grew as the flowers in her garden did, slowly, naturally, without force or artifice. Their conversations took place among the orchids, their language one of shared silence and mutual respect. He learned about her life before him, a life of hardship, of loss, but one she spoke of without a trace of self-pity. She was a scholar of botany, a passion she had pursued through night classes and library books. He, in turn, found himself speaking to her of things he had never spoken of to anyone, the pressures of his legacy, the isolation of his power, the strange emptiness that had resided in him for so long. One evening, they stood together in the greenhouse, the air warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming orchids. The world outside, with its demands and its dangers, felt a million miles away. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the home his soul had been searching for. He reached out and took her hand. "I shattered one life to save you," he said, his voice a low, earnest vow. "Let me spend the rest of mine building a new one with you." Alara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. Her eyes were clear and bright, with an emotion he now recognized as love. You didn't save me, Daehyun, she said softly. You simply saw me. And I saw you. And in that simple, profound truth, their new life began. He gave her a single, perfect white orchid, a simple knot of passionate, fleeting romance like the red roses, but of something far more rare and enduring, a love that was patient, strong, and deeply rooted in the truth. And so our story comes to a close. It is a reminder that the most beautiful facades can hide the ugliest truths, but that true strength, true dignity, can never be extinguished. It is a story that proves that justice, when wielded with precision, can be a beautiful and necessary thing. And it is a story of love, not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet, steadfast love that grows in the spaces where two souls recognize the truth in each other. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you are moved by the story of Daehyun and Ilera, please leave a comment below and tell us which moment resonated with you the most. Your engagement helps us continue to tell stories that matter. Until next time, be strong, be true, and never be afraid to let the masks fall.